Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar, where we're kindly joined by Gilbert Joseph to help us understand about how to bridge the gap with SaaS application security.
Good
morning. Can I have a few signals from those of you in the chat box? There'll be a chat tab open. I just want to know if you can see the screen and you can hear us loud and clear, please. Hey, good morning all. Thank you. All right, so we've got a chat tab open. There'll be a Q&A at the end of Gilbert's session today, and today's session is recorded, so you will be emailed a link afterwards, so you can watch this on demand, and it'll also be emailed to those who did register who have been unable to make today's session. And with that, what I'll do is I'll hand over to Gilbert to run us through SaaS security with Palo Alto Networks.
Awesome. Thank you, Dean. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, that's coming through.
I can see your screen now,
Awesome.
Gilbert. How about those of you out there? Can I see a message or two to see if you can see Gilbert's screen? All right, we've had some confirmation there, Gilbert. Ready to roll.
Yes, awesome. All right, well, thanks, guys. I think what I might do as well is maybe switch off my video, if that's okay, just to consume some bandwidth, just to avoid any glitches, if that's okay. Right. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I guess before we get started, it's probably a good idea to define what SaaS is all about before we get into the aspects of SaaS security itself, just to avoid any misconception, because there are a lot of buzzwords out there in the market with respect to things like, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, code as a service, and as you shift even further into the dark web, even things like hacking as a service. So SaaS is effectively a way of delivering applications over the internet as a service. Instead of installing and maintaining software, the delivery method is over the web, freeing yourself, the consumer, from the complexity of licensing, installing and managing software, and even the associated hardware that may be required to host the actual application. Now, one of the things that I think that's quite attractive with SaaS is, unlike traditional software, which is conventionally sold as a perpetual license with an upfront cost, SaaS is based on a subscription model. Therefore, it's much easier to consume. And in recent years, with cloud computing and customers really embracing the service delivery mechanism in the cloud, whether you're in sales, marketing, finance, HR, engineering, or DevOps, the adoption of SaaS applications within organization has grown exponentially. And from a user perspective, I think it's probably fair to say that if we were to find one key characteristic, it would simply be the fact that it is an on-demand consumption. It's all about the ease of use, whether it be a Netflix service as a streaming application, or an app that you need to download where when you go to a 3-day conference, for example. And because of that user friendliness, now we're seeing, I think in a lot of instances, a SaaS first strategy. And so we will continue to see not only an upward trend with the adoption of SaaS, but also in the maturity of some of those SaaS platforms. And by maturity, I mean the integration with APIs, with other applications, and how the apps themselves can be tailored to provide a more unique user experience. Things like geolocation, wayfinding features as you navigate your way through a stadium, for example, to look for a coffee shop. So here are some of the statistics that were published early this year. So this is a breakdown of the relationships between the number of users within an organization and the expected mapping that we have to the number of applications that's typically seen in an organization. And as you can see, as the organization grows, there is also a growing complexity that comes with that. Now, keep in mind that these figures were published in early 2020, before all hell broke loose. And it's probably fair to say that, in the last 3 to 4 months, what we've seen is actually been quite unprecedented, and these numbers will likely, be inflated, I think, a lot more in the current climate. You could argue also that some of these numbers maybe are a little bit far-fetched to some degree. So I did a bit of an experiment myself not too long ago, and I realized that I myself personally consume 42 apps on my phone. Now, some of you could argue that some of those apps are private and maybe not categorized as a sanctioned application. But what if I work in a BYOD environment, right? So the same device that I use on my personal Google Drive, for example, may have a template file, and I'm using also that same file to actually upload corporate data into, say, the company Shepherd Online. So as you can see, we can inadvertently introduce security risk with, SaaS applications in any organization. Keeping in mind also that, traditionally, once data leaves the on-prem environment, ITs themselves don't have the visibility or control of where the data is actually residing and any other risk that may be potentially lurking within the environment. So this is a quick report from Unit 42. Unit 42 is our global threat intelligence team at Palo Alto Networks, and we essentially have a number of experts who do some hunting and collecting of unknown threats, as well as reverse engineering a whole bunch of malware using a number of code analysis technique. Now, I think it's probably fair to say that the SaaS first model is now at the center of any at the center of every business strategy, whether you're in the education space or whether you're in corporate or in the enterprise. But I guess, as always, with the rapid adoption of any new technology, we also see some growing challenges. So this is some numbers that we've just published. So between March and April of this year, for example, just to give you a bit of an idea, Unit 42 was able to observe that there were just an average of 1.2 million what we call newly observed host names containing the keyword COVID-19, right? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because a lot of the times, from the adversary perspective, they're always trying to be, I guess, relevant and very topical in the way they actually target users out there in the market. And of those 1.2 million domains that we've seen, 56,000 of those are actually hosted in public cloud. So as you can see, the adversary themselves, they're not only using their own platform, they're leveraging public cloud as well. The same public cloud that you may be using yourself, whether it be, things like, Google G Suite or Office 365. If you look at some of these numbers, the numbers themselves are quite astounding, with the majority of those domains actually being hosted in AWS. Followed by GCP and Azure. The last one is also, out of those 1.2 million domains, we found that 86,000 of those domains were actually classified as risky and malicious. And again, just to put it into context, if we have an environment where you're using a SaaS platform, or maybe you've got a public cloud architecture, where you're actually residing your corporate data is potentially the same environment that may be infiltrated with some sort of malware. And the last one is, I guess, from a statistics perspective, we can see that it's an average of 1,700 domains on each day that are actually created, which is quite astounding. So let's take a look at some of those cloud challenges. So with the SaaS adoption, so as you can see at the bottom of the screen there, we've got different locations, the endpoints, the branches, data center, and so forth. And at the very top, we have, the different SaaS platforms, and you may recognize some of these names already. But some of the things to highlight here is, I guess, with respect to a SaaS platform, it is a direct access to the cloud, right? So you're not necessarily going to have a security appliance inline intercepting the actual traffic. You may be at home, for example, you may be at a coffee shop, you may be on the road, you may be on a mobile, and you may be accessing those those platforms directly. The other key thing is shadow IT, and that's becoming, I guess, quite topical in the last few years, especially once organizations have decided to embrace the cloud, with applications effectively being utilized without the knowledge of the IT department. And the last one is the the actual data sharing itself, because a lot of times there are no controls in place, to prevent me, the user, from downloading a file, say for example from my personal Dropbox, and then uploading that same file in an AWS S3 bucket. So while the adoption of SaaS has been widely accepted, the threats that are being introduced out there have somewhat been overlooked. So at Palo Alto Network, we often talk about reducing the attack vector, the analogy of a funnel, to reduce the surface area to a smaller and more manageable footprint for us to actually control and implement security policies. But here, as you can see, with the adoption of all these applications, we've actually widened that attack vector by opening up ourselves to a lot more risk and vulnerabilities. So here are some of the, challenges that we constantly see, especially when it comes to the sensitivity of information. If we look at the data breaches that continue to make the headlines, the likes of Sony, Marriott Hotel, Under Armour, Toll, the number is actually on the rise, and the sophistication of attacks have also matured. As we've just seen in the past few weeks alone, we've had a lot of the domains which have been registered with, things like, with terms like COVID or virus or corona, for example. And a lot of these have been considered as high risk, preying in a way on customers, with things like fake web shops or ebooks or illicit pharmacies. And 98% of those sites are also hosted in public cloud. Compliance also, I think, plays a big part in any organization today from a strategy perspective, especially as we're moving towards workloads into the cloud. Risk assurance is also a key focus against cyber attack. And the last one is obviously the cloud threats. But I think it's also key to point out here that when we talking about threats, we often not necessarily talking about the adversary that's sitting outside of the organization. It could often be, someone inside the organization. It could be a disgruntled employee, for example, which may turn to be malicious. And if we look at some of the latest report by the OAIC, which is the Office of Australian Information Commissioner, the report was published back in February of 2020 this year. 32% of leaks are actually accidental due to human errors. So it's just something to keep in mind. From a threat perspective, the security landscape has shifted, quite a fair bit. So the adversary is not necessarily now on the outside of the network. That could often be on the inside of the network, whether it would be an accidental or intentional exposure of actual data. So what are some of the key questions that we need to ask ourselves when we're embracing some of those some of those SaaS applications out there? Number one is, what apps are my employees using out there today? Okay, and do I have visibility of those apps? Are those apps themselves actually safe within in the environment? How do I protect then that sensitive information? How do I know that somebody is not going against company policy and potentially sharing student records onto a SharePoint online that's exposed to the internet? And the last one is, how do we govern then access to those SaaS applications? Now, how do we secure them from the threats that we're seeing out there today? So a quick highlight of the SaaS security. So Prisma at Palo Alto Networks is effectively our solution to your cloud journeys. We essentially have three offerings under this pillar, and your requirements would effectively dictate how we can assist you in your cloud adoption. But the focus today is going to be on Prisma SaaS, and Prisma SaaS is effectively a multi-mode cloud access security broker, what we call a CASB. It's a service that allows you to govern sanctioned apps and also look at their usage across all users in your organization and prevent the risk also from breaches and non-compliance. So in order to deliver a comprehensive SaaS security, I think it's important to understand the building blocks when it comes to mitigating risk. As users connect from the head office, if we look at the diagram below, whether it be from the head office, the branch, or even a mobile device, or even an unmanaged device, they may be traversing a firewall, right? And this is where we have not only visibility, but full control of the access, whether it's a sanctioned app or not. So for example, just give you a bit of an explanation. An unsanctioned app is basically what we deem as not appropriate. If it's a tolerated app, it's something that we see as potentially important to the business, but not necessarily under our control. And the last one is sanctioned app, which is applications that we have under our control. You as the admin or as a consumer of our product, you will have global admin rights and the right permissions to those particular platforms. So based on the user, the device, the location, we can apply necessary controls. And as you can see underneath the blue layer in the middle of the screen there, at the moment, we are taking, I guess, making the assumption that the traffic itself is traversing a firewall. So if you're used to if you're familiar with our firewall, for example, at next generation firewall, our PA series, that firewall itself would have, a series of threat protection subscriptions that are bound to that device. But as you can see, just underneath that, we also have something called Enterprise DLP. Enterprise DLP is fairly new and something that's going to be introduced to our firewall in the coming months. And that's effectively looking at data in motion. So as traffic is actually traversing the firewall, we can actually, put data loss prevention data policies in place for detection and response. And a detection rule is effectively based on our engine, and we can use things like regular expressions and different data patterns, which allows us to classify sensitive information, things like maybe tax file numbers, credit card details, and a response rule, on the other hand, is the action that you'd actually be taking to mitigate the risk of that data loss. So I hope I've made it quite clear here that there needs to be a key distinction between those three categories when it comes to the apps, right? The unsanctioned, the tolerated, and the sanctioned. Now, it's probably worth noting also from a SaaS security perspective, especially when it comes to Prisma SaaS, you do not need to have a Palo Alto firewall in play. You could have a firewall from a different vendor, and as long as we have visibility into the SaaS application, we can then provide a more comprehensive end-to-end SaaS security solution. So now if we take it one step further, we've talked about the firewall that's in line. If we have now a Prisma SaaS subscription, which is effectively an instance that we spin up in Google Cloud, we now have this as an overlay, if you like, another layer of security. And when we do have that, it gives us the ability to get, I guess, further visibility into the sanctioned apps, as well as, applying some of the things that we talked about earlier on with respect to the DLP, for example, or the threat protection. So at the moment, for example, from a DLP perspective, we have over 250 predefined data patterns. That already come with the box, things like healthcare, national ID, tax IDs, source code, credit card information, and a lot more. So, and these patterns are also customizable. So not only do they come pre-canned out of the box, but you can also customize your own. We also have a whole bunch of contextual engines running in the back end that gives us a lot more information with respect to the accuracy of the information that we're picking up when it comes to getting some of those matches. So the Prisma SaaS, I guess, if you think about it, we talked about data in motion before when we having data traversing our firewall. Prisma SaaS is more about data at rest. So from a comprehensive SaaS security perspective, if you have a combination of both, and an inline gateway to look after data in motion, and a Prisma SaaS to look after data at rest, we now have a comprehensive end-to-end solution where we can actually mitigate the risk of threats that may be lurking within the environment. Just going to check if there are any questions at this point. I don't see any questions just yet, so I think we're all good for now.
Gilbert, it's Dean. I saw a quick question come through earlier. Sorry, right. With regards to the keywords, how frequently or how does that get updated? Because you said it comes out of the box with a lot of keywords that get searched for. Is there any update process there?
Yeah, and that's a great thing. Good questions, and that's a great thing with the Prisma SaaS platform. As these updates are being generated in the back end, it becomes automatically available in the actual dashboard as part of the engine itself, right? So at the moment we're averaging, I think, on a monthly basis, a number of different updates. But not only are we able to get those new updates, but if you have, for example, if the customer themselves have certain keywords or matches that they want to actually customize and add themselves, they can do that also.
And another one we've had come through relates to the applications that Prisma has visibility into, in terms of what's the volume of applications that you've got visibility into, and how does are there plans to get that number to grow?
Yeah, look, most definitely. At the moment, we're looking at roughly about 25 applications, and even within some of those applications, there are actually subcategories as well. So if we look at Office 365, for example, that we consider that as one application. But if you look under Office 365, there's obviously numerous applications underneath that. Things like OneDrive or SharePoint Online and so forth. So yeah, so we constantly have and it's all about the demand as well, right? Understanding what the market actually is after, and then from a SaaS perspective, what's widely being used out there in the market today. So as you can see from the slide at the moment, Office 365 is a key one. Things like Drive, Salesforce, Slack, SharePoint Online, Workday. So yeah, there are a lot of applications out there, and we're continuously working to integrate a lot more into our Prisma SaaS platform. Okay, so let's move on. Oh, there we go. Leading on to the applications. Here's a quick snapshot of the application that we currently have. This picture here was probably taken earlier this year. I dare say that since then we've probably added a lot more as well. And if you can look at some of those applications there, it's a breakdown of just pure SaaS product as well as public cloud environments. If you look at things like Azure, for example, right, or AWS. Having the ability to look into an S3 bucket to make sure that nothing's actually lurking in the environment. And if I could maybe go back one step over here, you're probably aware of our Wildfire service, which is our sandboxing capability, right? The ability to look at unknown threats and being able to do a scan. So if we detecting a particular file that's sitting in a repository, whether it be SharePoint Online or a Google Drive, if we unaware of that file structure that we've seen in the repository, we can actually have Wildfire actually scan that repository to actually determine whether the file is actually malicious or benign. So that's something that's quite important from a threat protection perspective. And Wildfire, in this instance here with Prisma SaaS, is not a subscription that you need to actually purchase. It actually comes with the platform itself. So that's quite important to highlight here. So as we're scanning through these different applications on the network, whether it be a SharePoint Online or a Slack or ServiceNow or a G Suite product or even Dropbox, we need to be mindful that with things like Wildfire, we'd actually get that extra level of security with the sandboxing capabilities. So let's take a look at some use cases. I've taken a few screen caps here of what we're seeing. So here on the top left-hand side, you can see I'm running a report. I'm looking at the actual incidents on the actual dashboard, and I can actually filter the application at the moment by looking at only Office 365, because bear in mind that it's a single dashboard that can scan every single application that you have within the environment. So as you're going through the incidents, if there are a lot of incidents that's popping up on the screen, you want to have the ability to filter that down to only focus on what's required. So in this instance here, we've applied a filter to look at Office 365, and we can see also that it's actually picked up an executable, okay, sitting on the Office 365 platform. And on the right-hand side, you can see that also Wildfire has actually picked that up. So a few things to keep in mind here. I guess from a a repository perspective, if we look at the Wi-Fi dynamic analysis here, for example, you can see that typically user folders are storage locations for things like music, pictures, and downloads and things like that. But here we can actually see that the malware itself is actually sitting in a user folder. Now, malware often run executable content out of these folders to avoid detection, because usually it's applications that are running out of Windows system directories or program file folders, right? So here we've been able to detect through Wi-Fi, for example, that we've actually got a piece of malware with this exe file sitting in a user folder. And the third one down below is, I guess, a visual representation of the executable that's actually sitting there with a flag next to it. Now, you can also see that if a flag itself has been exposed due to what was inherited from the actual folder itself, the parent folder. So on the bottom of the screen, you can see in the middle there, you've got Alex files, and then underneath that, you have the zbot.exe. So from an inheritance perspective, we can also, get a snapshot of, some of these, some of the dangers of, some of the malware that may be sitting in the environment. Now, in a normal scenario, from a Prisma SaaS perspective, if you didn't have something like Wi-Fi or the ability to actually, detect some of those threats, a lot of the times, some of these threats would actually go unnoticed. And if it turns out that the adversary has also now control of your Office 365 environment with the global admin account, for example, they could easily use that platform as a launching pad to then, launch further attacks either within your environment or outside of the environment. So this is something that's quite important to highlight. The next one here is personally identifiable information. So here on the far left, we can see that we've actually picked up something. So the owner itself is Morris, and he's got something sitting in OneDrive. We can see when the file itself was actually created, and we can see that the file itself has been analyzed. Now, on the top right-hand side, you can see that from a data pattern perspective, we can actually pick up that, in this instance here, it's actually a US social security number. But this could also be, a tax file number or an ATO number or a credit card information as well, right? So, and on the bottom of the screen on the right-hand side, you can see here, who also has been able to access this file, because once we have Prisma SaaS provision within the environment, we can actually say, okay, well, my domain is aryon.com.au. Anybody else who doesn't match that particular domain is actually outside of my organization. Okay, and we can then have various controls, if you like, from an action perspective as to what we want to do. So if you look at the controls down below on the bottom of the screen, we have different types of remediation. Number one, you can do nothing, or you can choose to actually quarantine to quarantine the actual file. You can change the sharing of the file. Say, for example, we may have a user at Aryon who wants to share information with Palo networks. You can actually allow him to actually do that, right? We can notify the file owner. And then we can also apply different classifications as well, based on what we're seeing within the actual repository. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea as to some of the things that we can see from a Prisma SaaS perspective. Yeah, go on,
Gilbert. It's Dean. Just back on that use case there.
Sure.
With OneDrive, for example, does this mean that Prisma SaaS can override the native sharing settings that OneDrive and SharePoint Online, for example, allow an end user to do? So, for example, I might have a file or PowerPoint or whatever I might like to share with external users. Does this override that native Office 365 user setting?
Yes, depending on the policies. So, for example, a user may be unaware within the organization that they're not supposed to share a particular file type with an external party from a different domain. But as the administrator of the account, you may have different policies in place to say, within our organization, we are not to share information of a sensitive nature with certain domain types. So we do have the ability to, I guess, override some of these characteristics and some of those file properties, based on the policy of the organization.
Okay, so also with that data pattern matching, does that look within a file? Is that, am I interpreting
That's
that?
correct. It actually looks within the file, and we have this thing called proximity checks as well. So, for example, if we're picking up a PDF document and we can see the word Visa in there, followed by a 16-digit credit card or a 16-digit number, we can safely assume that that is a credit card detail, right? But if we see the word Visa not followed by any other numbers immediately after it, we can then, it is unlikely that that information that's been picked up is actually, sensitive in that nature. But yes, we do have the ability to inspect the files, whether it be a PDF or a Word document that be maybe sitting in that repository.
Mm. This also, sorry if I'm probably slowing you down here.
No, you're right.
With the Office 365 or even G Suite, does it classify an email as a file as well, or is it different?
No, it's a little bit different from that perspective. We do have the ability to obviously, as the from our perspective, it's effectively looking at data at risk, right? Sorry, data at rest, right? So the email itself, as it's traversing the network. So I guess if we were looking at it from an inline gateway perspective, that's a little bit different then, because then if the data itself is traversing our firewall, then we can look at the actual email and actually scan the content as it's going through, right? But from a Prisma SaaS perspective, it's essentially looking at the data at rest, if that makes sense.
Got it. And one other question that's come in is relating to those files. Can SaaS OCR PDFs, OCR an image-based PDF, or does it rely on the PDF being a text PDF?
Good question. I believe we can. That's a good question, actually. I need to double check on that one. I know that we've had some changes just been updated only in the last couple of months in terms of some of the PDF file formats. So I need to double check on that one actually, and come back to you with that.
Okay, no problem. That's all we've got come through at the moment.
Cool. So I'm just going to scan through. I've only got a couple more slides here. I'm just mindful of the actual time. So here, this is a quick illustration of the dashboard. So when we log on to the Prisma SaaS dashboard, we can see on the top left-hand side here, we're actually scanning at this point in time in this particular demo environment that I took a screen cap out of. There are 22 apps that it's currently being scanned. On the top right-hand side, we can see the data profiles. So here we've got 5 data profiles that have already been categorized, anything from legal, healthcare, financial information. At the bottom of the screen itself, once we look further into the actual incidents, we can get a better understanding of to how many incidents are we looking at and whether they're actually categorized. If you look at the color codes there, you can see whether it's actually red obviously being risky, orange means potentially risky, and green means it's actually okay. The other 2 screens there talks about, I guess, gives us an understanding of the users out there. So we can also see when we're looking at the dashboard, who are the users within the organization, who are I guess the culprits, if you like, who may be sharing a lot more information with respect to outside domains, and who are some of the collaborators within the organization who may be sharing a lot of that information. And it gives us a bit of an understanding as to what's our, I guess, traffic pattern looking like, what is typical user behavior, so that we can maybe implement new policies and talk to other staff members within the organization potentially as to some of the policy violation that may be taking place. Last slide. So here we've got a quick recap of from a Prisma SaaS perspective. So obviously, number one is that data and risk discovery, being able to get visibility into the apps that IT would typically not have visibility into, and then also being able to apply certain actions against some of that discovery, whether it be changing the permission on an actual file structure, or if we look at also maybe from an access control perspective, also being adaptive. We, for example, may want to share our data to any organizations within Australia, but we may not want to, for example, share data with any organizations outside of Australia. So these are some of the granular controls that we can have from a customizable perspective with respect to the access control. We've talked about the DLP feature, and again, that's a DLP feature that's built into Prisma SaaS. There's no subscription needed for that. That comes with the actual product. We talked about unmanaged BYOD access, because obviously when we have direct access into the cloud, and if we don't have an inline gateway that's that our data is actually traversing through, we can still then, because we have, I guess, visibility and control into the destination where the actual data itself resides, we can then have a lot of control around what's actually being stored in that environment. And the last one, obviously, is from a malware and threat protection perspective, being able to look at some of the threats which may be lurking into the environment with things like wildfire. So I think that's all for me, Dean. I'm mindful of time. Do you have any more questions at this point in time?
I've just got one extra one. Can you expand on wildfire and how it relates to that? I'm presuming it's the malware and threat. What's the value of wildfire there in that public cloud SaaS application?
Yeah, sure. So when we're talking about threats, we're talking about a couple of things. It's known threats and unknown threats. So known threats are things that are usually picked up by our threat protection subscription, right? And say, for example, it's a malware that's been around for potentially number of days, number of weeks, even number of years, but it's simply a different variant of malware. We've seen the malware before, we have a signature for it, and we can therefore mitigate that risk when we see that that threat within the environment, whether it would be on an endpoint, at a firewall, or in a Prisma SaaS perspective. Whereas Wi-Fi is about the unknown threat. It's from a 0-day perspective, it's a threat that we haven't seen before, and we're not sure as to whether that file, for example, that's sitting in our SharePoint Online has been tampered with. So, and when we do a scan, we may, based on the characteristics that we're seeing from that particular file, we may be suspicious that the file itself may be, a threat to the organization. So then what Prisma SaaS will actually do is actually upload that file into our Wildfire subscription service, which is a sandboxing facility, and then return a verdict back to Prisma SaaS to let us know whether that file is actually malicious or benign. And these are some of the things that, I guess, from a mitigation perspective, a typical IT admin would not be able to actually pick up on. So it's using that automation, that orchestration with all the amount of tools that we have from a global threat perspective to understand what's actually happening. Because one thing as well to also highlight from a Wi-Fi perspective, Wi-Fi is not only for the user, but it's a service that we have available to all our subscribers of Wi-Fi. So, for example, if we've just picked up a threat in a Coca-Cola factory in South America, for example, right? That threat now, obviously, we now have knowledge of that threat, and we have a signature now for it. So, from a Wi-Fi perspective, that becomes, I guess, a known artifact within our database, and we can then leverage on that global intel. So, on the other side of the world, here in Australia, for example, if we have the same threat that's just entered our organization, being able to leverage Wi-Fi gives us the ability to say, hey, you know what, we've just seen this file before 5 minutes ago on the other side of the world. We can now, mitigate that threat and actually contain it, and write the file as either malicious, or if it's benign, then simply release the file. Excellent.
Thank you. Just a couple of other questions have just come in here. So, and if I'm summarising the questions incorrectly, please keep updating the questions in the chat, and I'll keep going. Are the regexes predefined, and what predefined regexes exist in the system?
So at the moment there are 250 patterns. The regex at this point in time are predefined because the idea is to make it easier for the user, right? But in addition to that, you can also now, as part of the new application classification that we are introducing, I think we only introduced that back in May of this year, we can also then, using regular expression, you can actually create your own regex as well. So as part of this advanced classification, you have a combination of both the custom predefined patterns that come with it, and then you can also then define your own. In addition to that, we will also introduce a concept called data profiles. So if, for example, you may find that there are 5 different data patterns that are existing within the template that you'd like, you could actually combine those data patterns into a data profile and then apply that profile to a particular repository. So you can get fairly granular here in terms of regex and data patterns matching.
All right, thank you. So I think there's a question relates to around how would you tackle or approach an initial audit around cloud storage? So, for example, do you have any best practices or advice around someone with a large data repository or cloud storage repository in a public cloud application?
Yeah, sure. Look, I guess it varies from one environment to the next. Typically, and the great thing with Prisma SaaS, it's actually available for customers to actually trial. But what we would typically do is, once we have an idea as to, say, for example, what application, say, for example, it could be Office 365, and we want to look at, every repository that's sitting in SharePoint, for example, we would pick up that app once we have the full admin rights into that cloud application. It's just an API exchange key into our platform. Once we have that full access through the APIs between the two environments, it's just a matter of minutes until we can start scanning, right? And once we start scanning, then we have, I guess, the instant visibility as to, what's actually happening in the environment. So that's the number one, getting the visibility. And then the number two, then depending on what we want to do, then we can decide, what's the next step. Do we want to start quarantining maybe files? Do we want to change file ownership? Or maybe we simply want to, send an email out to the owner of the file. So, hey, by the way, the file that you've just shared to John Doe from another company is actually against company policy. Please go ahead and retrieve that file off the actual file share. So there's various ways, and I guess it's ensuring that we do it as per the best practice of the organization as well, not to upset too many users at the same time.
So what you're saying, though, if I'm hearing you correctly, from a technical perspective, even if the cloud repository is large, it's not that challenging given the volume of the predefined pattern matches and maybe some additional targeted ones to let the tool do its thing via the API.
That's correct, and that's the beauty of running an environment on a hyperscale, because we are leveraging the power of the cloud. We're not, dedicated, hardware. It's based on hyperscale infrastructure. So as the demand for more compute is required to actually scan a lot more resources, we simply spin that up in the back end, right? And that's actually happens dynamically in the back end as well. Yeah, without any interaction from the user or ourselves. More and some file sharing here, I think. So can you define in the tool policies to detect internal sharing, and to what granular degree? I have a specific example around the school environment. For example, if maybe a teacher accidentally shares an exam paper with students internally, is that the type of thing that you can configure and pick up on? Yep, most definitely. So from a Prisma SaaS perspective as well, if we have the ability to hook into Active Directory services, we can get a lot more granular around who do we want to share with, for example. So from an AD perspective, we may have a number of users within, say, the admin account, which is all the teachers, for example, and admin staff, right? And everybody else outside of that is deemed as potentially a student. So although you may be sharing the application with somebody from the same domain, if then outside of that particular group, we can then classify that as potentially unsafe, and then take the appropriate action based on that within the organization.
Okay, so I think that the next question relates to, you may have partially answered this one already. So the DLP rules can search members of an OU or a security group, say if a file's been shared with either an OU or security group, not actual individuals.
Yeah, that's right. So again, this goes back to how far can we tap into the AD infrastructure, right? So we can actually go back and look at depending on the properties and the groups that we can actually extract out of AD, from there we can get then a better control and visibility as to what do we want to do with the files that we've actually scanned. Do we want to share it with the entire group, or the entire subset, or the entire OU?
Okay, awesome. And this question I think is more of a comparative one. How would you describe the comparison between other native, say, DLP tools? So, for example, in G Suite, you've got G Suite Enterprise DLP. How does Prisma SaaS Security compare to those native DLP tools?
I think the key thing here to remember is with a lot of those native tools that it's specific to their platform only. But unfortunately, with a lot of organizations today, they're subscribing to not just one platform, right? They're subscribing to a multitude of different platforms, whether it be Salesforce, Workday, Office 365, G Suite. And I guess one of the key, differentiators here is we have one platform that can cater to every SaaS environment out there that's well known in the market today. Whereas a lot of the applications we already come with a native security tool is very much siloed. So if an environment has, say, for example, 10 different types of applications, you may have anywhere between 5 to 10 different dashboards and management consoles to actually look after the environment, which makes it quite hard in a lot of instances.
Okay, that's all the questions we've got outside of. I just have one question from myself, out of interest here. If you're looking to protect intellectual property, can you stop different file types by extension from being sent out to external organizations or shared externally?
Yes, you can. And again, this is going back to the customizable nature. From a data pattern perspective, you can define the file type, and then you can define also, how far do you want to extend that share, whether it be to a domain, to maybe even to another country, because as somebody is actually accessing the information from your repository, we have the ability to see, okay, where's the IP address coming from? It's potentially coming from, a part of the world that we deem as, unsafe, so that we can actually block that traffic there and then, not only from the source, but also by the file type.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that, Gilbert. Appreciate it.
Not a problem. All right, so I think what are we at to now? It's about 10 to. We've got about 17 people on the call, so maybe we can take maybe a quick 5 minute. We can do a little quiz if you like. So we've got a Kahoot quiz, and we've got some prizes to give away. So what I might do, just switch to my screen for a second. If I could get everybody to grab their mobile phone, and I will get you to jump onto a Kahoot in a minute. And then what I'll get you to do is register. So if you haven't played Kahoot before, it's effectively an interactive game. You'll jump onto a browser session. I'll give you a PIN number. You will join the game console. And once you join the game console, you'll see a number of questions coming up on the screen. And then you will have the ability to answer using your mobile phone. And obviously, the faster you answer the question and the more accurate the answers are, we actually accumulate points. And then towards the end of the competition, we then award a little prize. And I think we've got some vouchers to give away. Is that correct?
Yes, I think we've got a couple of, I think they're Uber Eats vouchers. I can't remember if they're Deliveroo or Uber Eats, but we've got a couple of Deliveroo or Uber Eats vouchers to give away.
Awesome.
For prize winners, yes.
All right, cool. So I'm just going to kick this off. Okay, so here's the PIN number. So this is the Kahoot.it. If you go grab your mobile phone, jump onto Kahoot.it, and then enter in the PIN number. Once you get the PIN number, put in your name. You can pick, use your own name or any nickname. And then we'll be able to get an idea as to, how many people have actually joined. So of the 17, we've got 60 people on the call at the moment. We'll be able to get an idea as to how many people are joining. So Kahoot.it and 5814401 is the PIN number. So we've got 3 people so far who've jumped on. Thank you. Four players. we'll give a couple more minutes because
Oh,
if we have 3 vouchers, it's going to be very easy for these guys now. So your chances are actually getting up more and more. All right, we've got 6.
50-50 chance by the look of that.
Yep.
All right.
All right, we don't seem to have anybody else jump. What, 7 players? There we go. So once I
Right.
start the game, you can still continue to join, but obviously you'll be missing out on the opportunity to, answer some of the questions at the very start. So, all right, I'll give it another, I think, 10 seconds, and then we'll kick off with the game, I think, and just be mindful of time. And I've only got 8 questions here. They're fairly straightforward. Hopefully, if you've paid some attention to what I've been talking about this morning, you'll get an idea as to, what these answers are. All right, I think 7 players. I think that's where we're at. So I'm just going to kick it off. So you'll see the questions on the screen, and then you'll be able to answer using your mobile phone. Okay. So here we go. Okay, so we've had 5 responses, and yep, we've got 3 of them saying Prisma. That is correct. Prisma Palo Networks is the industry most comprehensive, cloud security offering. Wonderful. So I think here we can also get an idea as to okay, so here we are. We get already a scoreboard happening, and Gilly is at the top of the board. Wonderful. All right, next question. True or false? Prisma SaaS only supports Office 365 applications. The quicker you are, obviously, the more points you get. Cool. It's true. Prisma SaaS does not support only Office 365 products. We have a whole different products, as we've seen on the slide earlier on. Wonderful. All right, let's see. Where are we up to? We've got Gilly still in the first position, followed by NP, and then we've got Anoop swimming. All right, let's go again. Next question. Prisma SaaS delivers complete visibility and control across user, folder, file activity within what apps? Tolerated, sanctioned, unsanctioned, and non-risky. Okay, so the right answer here is sanctioned. So we talked about the different types of apps out there: tolerated, unsanctioned, and sanctioned. Sanctioned obviously is where we have full control of the application. So we have global admin rights to the cloud app. So sanctioned app is the right answer here. Oh, we've got a new person in prime position. MP has taken over from Gilly. Okay, let's go again. Question number 4, comprehensive SaaS security is equal to inline gateway plus Prisma SaaS. True or false? That is true. Okay, so that's right. So we talked about that earlier on. Inline gateway plus Prisma SaaS gives you a comprehensive, end-to-end SaaS security from Palo Alto Networks. But obviously, as I pointed out, if you do not have a Palo Alto Network firewall, it doesn't mean that you still can't go ahead and get the Prisma SaaS. The two are 2 separate products. You still get the ability to, look into the SaaS applications and being able to mitigate the risk, from a Prisma SaaS perspective. Okay, MP still in prime position, followed by Gilly, and then we've got Mr. Knight, third place. Okay, let's see. Question number 5. What is the sandbox solution integrated with Prisma SaaS that's able to detect unknown threats? All right. Wi-Fi is correct. So that is our sandboxing solution that's integrated within Prisma SaaS. And I talked about that earlier on. It's effectively there to look at the unknown threats. MP still in first position, followed by Gilly and a noob swimming, who's done a bit of a comeback here. Here we go. We've got, I think, 2 more questions to go. Question number 6. Prisma SaaS is reliant on having a Palo Alto Networks next-gen firewall. False. That is correct. So we do not need to rely on Prisma SaaS, on a next-gen firewall to have Prisma SaaS from a security perspective. Obviously, if you want to have both the inline and data rest and data in motion from a mitigation perspective, the two work hand in hand together because we have a lot of APIs that we can integrate into our own product. But yeah, the two are not dependent on one another. All right, leaderboard, MP still in front, followed by Gilly. And we have a third contender that's just come through. Helen, okay. Question number 7. So this is some of the stats we had earlier on. 56,000 newly observed domain were hosted in public cloud. This is from the Unit 42 threat report that I touched on earlier in the slides. Some of the numbers that I had there. Yep, that is true. MP still in front, followed by Gilly and Oops swimming there again. Okay, last question, true or false? Prisma SaaS provides us visibility and control of sanctioned apps. And I think that's more of a double up question here. We've already talked about that before. Nice and easy one to finish off the game. And that is correct. True. Okay, so here we are with the podium. We've got in third place. There we go. Number 3. Number 2, MP. And the first one is Gilly. All right, guys. Congratulations. So this concludes our... So I'm just going to take a quick screen cap of that. And I am going to stop the music.
Oh, well, thank you very much, guys. So each of the winners will be contacted after this one for a $50 Uber Eats voucher. So thank you very much for your participation. I greatly appreciate it. Gilbert, what I'll do is I'll just take back over your screen.
Sure.
Okay. Just to wrap us up, we're right out of time here on today's webinar. So, team, please, for those of you who are still sitting here, thank you very much. Gilbert, I greatly appreciate. I know there was a lot of content to get through on today's session.
My
If
pleasure.
any of you have any questions at all, please do reach out to us directly. Gilbert, myself, anyone here at the team at Aryon, I'm happy to help answer any further questions you might have. And again, those winners of the questionnaire will be in contact very shortly to get you your $50 Uber Eats vouchers. That concludes today's webinar. Thank you, all of you, for attending. And I believe our next one in the series will be on July 22 regarding zero trust security. So thank you once again.
Thanks, guys.